after? The VA. Yes, the Department of Veteran Affairs, planning to eliminate more than 80,000 workers, and they're claiming they're doing all this for Doge savings. But what we know, once you actually have the receipts, is that the alleged $55 billion saved, NPR checked out the receipts, and guess what? Huge typos, Francesca. Only an estimated savings about $2 billion, a fraction of what the receipts claimed of the unverifiable claim of $55 billion. So all these lives ruined, all these people fired, claiming $55 billion only when there was $2 billion. And joining us now to talk about this firsthand experience of being fired by Elon Musk's doggy, Doge, is Jonathan Kamens, Jonathan Kamens, who was the cybersecurity lead for the VA.gov at the Department of Veteran Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. Before we get you in, I want your response to this. This was the secretary, the VA secretary. This is what he had to say. Just give him a listen, and then I have to get your response.
Now, we regret anyone who loses their job. And it's extraordinarily difficult for me, especially as a VA leader, and your secretary to make these types of decisions. But the federal government does not exist to employ people. It exists to serve people. At the VA, we are focused on serving veterans better than ever before. And doing so requires changing and improving the organization. Look, the VA was never perfect, and it will never be perfect. But we can and will make it better. As I have said before, we owe American veterans and hundreds of thousands of amazing employees solutions. And mark my words, that is what we will deliver.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Your response, sir.
Jonathan, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Let me put it this way. I worked under Secretary Dennis McDonough for a year and a half, and Dennis McDonough, who used to be Barack Obama's chief of staff, was an amazing man and a dignified man and a very talented man at what he was doing. And I don't see any of those qualities in Secretary Collins, is what I would say.
The VA doesn't, or the government doesn't exist to employ veterans. 1 in 4 government employees, VA employees is a veteran. Which is massive. And so I guess, the callousness with which even the Veterans Affairs is being treated is not something I think a lot of us saw coming, especially just because in just showmanship, in, empty words, the Trump administration seemed to be a little deferential to veterans. That's kind of gone all out the window. Can you just walk us through your job at the VA, and then maybe even before your job, but what the VA does?
Sure. So the job of the VA is to support veterans and their caregivers and their families after they have performed their military service. And I will be the first to admit that I don't agree with every military action that the United States is engaged in throughout their history, but it's not the choice of the individual veterans to decide what military actions they get deployed into. And when they come back from their military service, wherever it was, and they need support from the government, they are entitled to that support. And it is, I believe, a sacred duty of the government to provide them with all of the benefits and services to which they're entitled. There are many laws that specify exactly what benefits and services veterans are entitled to. And it is the job of the VA to ensure that every veteran gets all of the services and benefits they're entitled to effectively, efficiently, and without undue hassle and undue burden on the veteran. And yeah, please.
Oh, those services can be healthcare, housing, job assistance. What kinds of services?
I worked in an area which was mostly focused on healthcare, but absolutely healthcare, education assistance, housing assistance, mental health care. Burial benefits. Veterans have the option of being buried in a military cemetery or having a VA medallion, a military medallion put on their tombstone, right? And and I couldn't possibly list all of them. There are safety benefits if a veteran is facing trauma, is experiencing a traumatic event, is experiencing some sort of mental health break. There are emergency services that VA gives. Suicide prevention. Unfortunately, suicide is a huge problem among veterans, and there is a huge effort within the VA to do suicide prevention, and of course there are services that were provided by the VA until January 20th that I'm pretty worried are not going to be provided anymore. The VA certainly was, and I hope still is, providing gender affirming care to veterans who need it. And I will be honest with you, I don't see that that's likely to continue very long under. Nope. If Trump and Secretary Collins have anything to say about it. So, I mean, the veterans who serve this country, they have given frequently not just their time, and not just a part of their lives, but they've given a part of themselves, and they deserve to be supported after they do that. And to see this threat to remove 83,000 employees from the VA over the next year, it's impossible. I cannot conceive of the possibility that they will be able to continue to provide the services that they've been providing if they do that.
And also, as Francesca,
that just terrifies me.
And as Francesca said, 25% of the VA's employees, folks, are veterans. And I appreciate, Doug, you kind of connecting the dots for folks, because people don't know. I mean, this is a vital service for veterans, the people who have served honorably, right? I'm like you, Francesca and I are like, we don't agree with U.S. foreign policy, but I know a lot of friends who are soldiers, veterans, right? They do as they're told. They put their life on the line. Many of them come back with PTSD, with injuries, amputations, right? They're not suckers and losers. That's what Donald Trump called them, right? There are people who serve their country. At the very least, this country, the richest, most powerful country on the earth, can give them healthcare benefits, a leg up to help them, get situated in life. And with 83,000 people being fired, that's a gutting of the VA. But you were the cybersecurity lead for the VA.gov. And there is something here which deeply troubles me, in addition to what you said, is the potential security threat of Doge, or as Francesca lovingly calls him, Doggy, these 19 to 25-year-old. These people who now have access to our social security numbers, our financial data, to the data that is available about veterans. What are they doing with this data? Can this data be exploited, stolen, used by foreign adversaries? Firing the cybersecurity lead of VA.gov, to me, does not seem like a really smart move if you're interested in protecting the security of America and American soldiers. But I'm just an English major, Jonathan.
Well, I would tell you that I think we have ample reason to believe that Doge isn't particularly worried about security, because they are rampaging through the federal government, knocking down walls that have been protecting data for decades every chance they get. There's a concept in the federal government of decentralization of data. Every agency has its own data that it needs in order to serve American citizens and residents of our country, but they don't share data with other agencies unless there's a specific reason, which is authorized by law. And that's on purpose. That is, Doge loves to talk about getting rid of inefficiency. That is an intentional inefficiency. You want to put friction between different agencies that have data, because if you take all that data and you aggregate it all together in one place, it makes it ripe for abuse. And that is exactly what Doge is doing. Why are they taking all that data and trying to gain centralized access to it? Why are they giving individual Doge employees access to data from multiple agencies at the same time from the same computer equipment? That is unheard of prior to the Trump administration. If you were working in multiple agencies prior to the Trump administration, you had 2 laptops. You had 1 laptop for each agency, and the data for agency 1 stayed on laptop 1, the data for agency 2 stayed on laptop 2. That's on purpose. That is to protect the privacy and the security of Americans' data. And now we have Doge coming in, and they are just going on a slash and burn campaign through the federal government, gaining access to data in every single agency that they can. And they're talking about centralizing it all. If you go read that executive order that Trump signed on January 20th that created Doge, he explicitly says in there that one of the missions of Doge is to centralize data access. To what end? To what end? The end is to abuse the data. The end is to use the data in ways that will harm Americans and in ways that Congress did not intend when they authorized the collection of that data. There's no other reasonable explanation for what they're doing.
Jonathan, by the way, Jonathan is joining us. He's the cybersecurity lead for VA.gov. Until he was fired by Doge. Can you tell us what you explicitly did? And do you think you were targeted for another reason? Or do you think it was the reason that you stood in the way of this kind of hoovering up of data and centralization of data?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think they knew what the heck I did there. So no, I don't think they fired me specifically because I stood in the way of them centralizing the data. I think they fired me because I was being politically active, and word got back to them that I was being politically active anti-Doge. And I will tell you this, the firing went down on Valentine's Day. It's a great Valentine's gift. They fired me and 40-something of my colleagues. They started the firing at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, and they sent out emails to me and my colleagues one by one. Of course, they didn't send them all at once because that would have been kind. They trickled them out over like 2 hours. And we were on a Signal chat like, oh my God, I just got one, talking about what was going on. I was the last person fired, so like at almost 9 o'clock at night. And as far as I could tell, I can't find anyone who was fired later than I was. And and that's how it was. And I know that the night before that happened, I had been talking about a rally that was being organized for that morning at HHS and on a mailing list that I was on. And I know that there's at least one person on that mailing list who is, I would say, a Doge sympathizer, is how I would put it. And I am fairly certain that that person leaked that email message that I sent back to Doge, and I was the last person fired because I was the last person added to the list, and I was added to the list after I sent that message to the mailing list. That is my theory. And obviously I can't prove it because Doge is not telling anyone why they fired any of the people they fired, right? There is no transparency whatsoever in why the people are fired, but that is my theory about what happened.
Mm.
I mean, I guess I wanted to just like push you further on that and ask you, if you're in a union, if you're with a federal union, because this is a massive violation of workers' protection, right? The idea that you could do something like this, and you're not the first. I believe it was an FAA, someone who was in charge of basically like military airplanes for the FAA was also fired, they believe, because of something that they said anti-Doge, and someone told on them or shared a post or whatnot. But yeah, what's the fallout now? I mean, there are 30 lawsuits against Doge currently. Are you part of one of them? What is sort of this status, and maybe if you're part of the union as well?
So the organization that I was part of, U.S. Digital Service, was not unionized. I came to learn after the fact that I think it's possible that maybe I could have joined a union, but I'm not sure. But no one else in my department was unionized. However, you are correct. Even leaving aside the question of whether I was fired for political reasons, the way they fired us was absolutely illegal, because what they did was a reduction in force, and there are regulations and laws about how reductions in force have to be executed within the federal government, and they followed none of those rules. The group that I'm a part of is investigating legal action against the government for the fact that we were all fired. But I want to be realistic here. We may get our back pay if we win that lawsuit, but let's be honest here. We're not going to get our jobs back. Like it's pretty clear that Doge has no intention of letting the United States Digital Service continue to function in the way it functioned before. So what's going to happen if we win our lawsuit is we will get reinstated, immediately get put on administrative leave, and then they will go through the RIF process properly and fire us again. That is the most likely outcome. So having said that, the reason why I'm participating in that lawsuit, at least, is because I just want to throw sand in the gears. Anything I can do to make them have to work for it, I'm going to make them do, because I want to make it harder for them to fire the next person and the next person after that. So that's my goal.
Jonathan, our community that is watching is giving you compliments for, number one, being a fascinating and informative guest, but also thank you for doing what you were doing. Thank you for still speaking up and speaking out. I want to ask you two quick questions before we let you go. Before we get to the good news, you mentioned the fact that they're hoovering up data, which is like digital gold, and centralizing it. Worst case scenario, what are they going to do with this data?
I mean, I have two concerns. The first concern is that I think both Elon Musk and Donald Trump are petty, vindictive, vengeful people, and I think that they will use the data to go after people who they consider their enemies. I think I will point out that every authoritarian regime in the world has a secret police source of some form or another, whose job is to collect data about private citizens and build dossiers about them, and to build a culture of fear in which people, tattletale on their neighbors and their coworkers, right? I think that's the trajectory we're on. I think we should expect that to happen. And it's kind of terrifying. And then the other concern I have is, you mentioned earlier in the show, Watch, that the current boogeyman for the Republican Party and for Trump is trans people. And there are many databases within the federal government which would enable the government to identify trans people living in the United States. And just as one example, there's insurance databases which have billing codes for gender affirming care. Right there at the Department of State. If you applied for a passport with an M gender marker 10 years ago, but then when you renewed it, you applied for a passport with an F gender marker, they have that record because they know what your last passport report said on it. So there are databases all over the government where they can intuit trans people, and I don't see any reason why they're not going to amp up the war they're fighting against trans people and use the data that they have access to go after them. And I just find that idea terrifying. I don't think it's implausible that that's coming.
Not at all. I mean, you can imagine, they consider trans people to be abhorrent. They want to eradicate them. They also think that they are sex offenders, right? And so we have databases of sex offenders in neighborhoods. You can easily see them. They have databases on who they think are DEI hires, right, within the federal government. They have, so-called hotlines. If you see waste, fraud, abuse, or a Black woman, an accomplished Black woman, please let us know, so we can target that person. And so you can easily imagine, a database of finding your trans person in your neighborhood, because again, that's what this Christian nationalism, fascistic project really is. Jonathan, I'm like speechless. I'm like, thank you so much.
Okay, Francesca, I know we have a little bit of time. We're out of time, but can I ask you one final question, Jonathan?
Sure.
I don't want to end on a purely dystopian note, even though I agree with you, and that is my worst fear as well, what they're going to do with the data. How do you recommend the rest of us watching, who feel just our mouth is like agape right now after hearing what you said? How do we fight back, sir? How do we resist? What can we do to help you?
The first thing I want to say is that if you are a federal worker, you are out of time to resist. Like, there is no more waiting and seeing. There is no more protecting your own job and keeping your head down and just doing your job. You have to resist illegal orders. You have to push back if something is asked of you that you know is wrong or illegal. We've seen that. There's the African Development Fund, I think it's called, that has managed to keep Doge out of their building for weeks now. Like, we've seen some federal workers that are rising up and pushing back, and we need every federal worker to be resisting Doge in every way that they can. And
Absolutely.
then in terms of everyone else in the country, look, it's a hard question. I don't know what we can do, but I think one thing we can do is, we should be attending protests. The more, the better. We should be calling our senators and our representatives. The more frequently, the better.
Yeah.
Right. We should be demanding that they do something. I have to tell you, I have been, and I share, I think you agree with me on this. I have been like gobsmacked by how poorly the Democrats are responding in this moment. Like, I will give you an example of this. A month ago, I went to the websites of my senators and my representative, and I subscribed to their constituent email lists. And I thought, surely once I subscribe to their constituent email lists, I will start getting updates every day about all the terrible things that Doge is doing that they are fighting back on. I have received in over a month from all three of them one email message total among the three of them. And I don't understand it, because the Republicans figured out 30 years ago that the way you do this is you keep your base riled up. And the way you do that is you communicate with them constantly and you make them angry. But the thing is that the Republicans have to make their base angry by lying to them. They make up garbage. And that's what they make them angry about. The Democrats right now are in this moment where they do not have to lie to make people angry. They can just tell people the truth about what's happening. And I will say, I admire the Democrats for being the ones who don't actually want to win by lying. I like that about them. But you know what? Now is the time when they can tell the truth and make their base angry. So why have I not heard a single email message in over a month from my senators and my representatives saying what is going on in Washington? How do they expect people to be rising up if the people don't know there is something that they should be rising up about? And it just boggles my mind. So call your senator and your representative and say, hey, I'm hearing about all this stuff that's happening in Washington. Why aren't I hearing about it from you? I'm on your mailing list. And by the way, if you're not on their mailing list, subscribe. And then you can say, I'm on your mailing list. Why aren't you emailing me every day? And the same thing is true if you have Republican senators and representatives. I'm sorry, but if you do have Republican senators and representatives, you should be calling them every day too, because it's making a difference. We're seeing the needle move. They are getting more nervous because every time they have a town hall, they have people throwing tomatoes at them and demanding what's going on with the VA, what's going on with Social Security, because people are realizing something is happening. We need to put pressure on Congress to actually do their job, which is to force the president to spend the money that Congress has appropriated, and that will shut down Doge.
Jonathan Kamens, thank you so much for being with us. Again, cybersecurity lead for va.gov, at the Department of Veterans Affairs, was let go by, illegally, we believe, by Doge. Please come back and let us know. Let's just keep tabs on what's going on, and hopefully we can, continue to support you as well.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.